How do you thrive during times of crisis? So look, I'm Tim Adams, and for the last 30 years, I've been working with people that you listen to on the radio, that you've watched on the big screen, people that if you watch pro sports, you've seen on Sundays, guys that are in the Hall of Fame, guys that are MVPs, guys that have been Olympic gold medalists, world champions, executives. It includes founders and entrepreneurs as well. And in that, we're in this uncharted territory with all this confusion, all this chaos, so much noise going on around us that we need to take stock, right? And I'm here to tell you that it's never too late to start preparing. It's never too late to get back to the basics. Today, I'm really feeling called to discuss how can you thrive during times of chaos? How can you thrive when things are uncertain? How can you thrive when you've got fear and doubt knocking at your door? When you're finding yourself making impulsive decisions and behaviors and you feel like you've been blindsided, right? How can you thrive when you feel like everything's kind of been taken away from you? And to do that, what I'd like to do is share with you some of the tools that I use with some of my clients, right? How I can take a professional athlete and improve their capacity, improve their longevity, help them be able to make better decisions and make it instantaneously because of the preparation that was put into the work that had been done. And look, if you have not prepared for this moment, that's okay, because it's never too late to start preparing. Fair enough, right? So here's what I would like to do: a shift over into how I take that concept of the general adaptation syndrome and utilize it for my concept of working with my clients, my professional athletes, my executives and things of that nature, right? So my private clients, when I look at them, so I call this the stress adaptation cycle. Okay? So, this is time. And this is actually, this could be a lot of different things. It could be adaptation. It could be performance. It could be capacity. It could be pretty much anything, right? So I'm just going to put performance here for now. All right. So just like the general adaptation syndrome, we kind of go along and everything is kind of hunky-dory, right? This is kind of our baseline. And then what happens at a moment in time is we experience a stress. A stressor, a stimulus, and look, it could be additional load in the weight room. It could be sprinting. It could be a sickness. It could be a virus. It could be your boss yelled at you. You got in a fight with your loved one. Stressors, your body doesn't know the difference between a physiological stress or a psychological stress. It will respond. That general adaptation syndrome responds whether it's psychological or physiological. It's indifferent to whether it's an external stimulus or an internal stimulus. Your body follows this process to a T. So when we experience this stressor, the general adaptation syndrome, our body goes into alarm, right? And our body starts to resist it. So we go into what's known as a sympathetic fight or flight mechanism state, right? What that does to the system, psychologically, physiologically, is it suppresses the system. So the system now drops down. So now our system is on a downward spiral, right? And it's going to continue downward until at some point in time, an intervention occurs, okay? So it's at this point in time here that an intervention occurs, right? Once that intervention occurs, that doesn't mean that this downward spiral doesn't continue to go down. It does. It actually continues to go down further until it will naturally bottom out. And then it's going to work its way back up to that baseline, right? And to the degree at which this intervention was imposed, it will dictate how fast we get back to that baseline. And what ends up happening, and again, to the degree and the skill that we apply this intervention will dictate whether or not we actually create supercompensation, okay? Now, supercompensation is our body's adaptation to the stressor, the stress, the stimulus that was imposed upon it. We receive a stress, our body gets suppressed, right? So we are suppressed here. So we're suppressed here because we're in this sympathetic state, right? Our biochemicals, the epinephrine, norepinephrine, cortisol are being released. And it will continue to go down and be suppressed for as long as this stressor is imposed upon it. Now, the beautiful thing about our body, about our physiology and psychology is that the moment we intervene, and look, the intervention could be as simple as if you're running, stop running. You take a break, right? You sprint, you stop, you catch your breath, you go again. That is an intervention, right? But that's not the intervention we're going to be talking about today. Don't worry, I'm going to give you some great tools for intervention. The quality of the intervention is going to help dictate the degree to which I'm going to super compensate. So this piece here is called super compensation. Okay? And supercompensation is our ability to be able to adapt to this load. Does that make sense? Right? Everybody makes sense? So with that said, now what we want to do is figure out what can we be doing at this inflection point. So this inflection point is the moment we right the ship. Right? Now, look, in a pro athlete, we load the athletes with weights. We load the athletes with volume in terms of the number of sprints we might do. We load them in terms of how fast we want them to run, right? And we can manage that load very qualitatively and quantitatively as well, right? And we can measure their adaptation quite easily through a lot of different biomarkers, right? Again, I'm not going to get into that for this particular time, but I want you to understand that the stressor could be something that we impose on ourselves. We go out for a run, right? So let's play this out for a second, right? Let's say you're a runner and you go out for a run every day. You run the same route, you run it at the same time. And what happens is that when you first started running, it was a stressor to your system and your body adapted and it got easier, right? And let's say you've been doing that exact same route, exact same time for years. What happens is your body isn't feeling the stress anymore and it's not being suppressed as much. And so what ends up happening is instead instead of creating super compensation, your body might drop down here, but it's only going to come right back up to here, and then you're just going to bottom out again. Or what may happen is you might come down here, and then you drop down again, and then you might drop down again, and then you just might keep dropping down because you're not stressing the system enough to get it back to baseline. And that is the beautiful part about managing this process, because you have to know how the body adapts and how your client is adapting and how you're adapting in order to know exactly where you are on this curve. And when you know what's going on in your world, like right now in our world, we're still here. Sure, there are interventions that are in place, but we're still on this downward spiral. We don't know the ramifications and the total issues that will be expected from what's going on. Like, we're still on a downward spiral. Have the interventions been enough? Has isolation been enough? Has not doing anything been enough, right? And look, that's just for this particular instance, right? Now we have to take a look at what's going on in our world, right? We went from being active, maybe, or at least having a routine, to now that routine being disrupted. And so our capacity is now dropped. And if we don't do something about it, we might stay down in this suppressed state, and we might continue to drop down, right? So the worst thing to ever happen in this is not managing this process, so that when I get down here, instead of being able to right the ship and come back up, my body is going to go straight down again. And then it's going to go down again, and then down again. And that leads to what we call in athletics to overtraining, right? But in the normal population, this is what leads to injury. This is what causes people to get sick. This is what causes people to decrease their performance, right? And it may not sound like that big of a deal, but over time, it's what leads to traumatic injuries, where you can be taken out. And look, what's going on in the world right now is way more detrimental than traumatic injuries. But if your system is suppressed like this, then you're more susceptible to getting the flu. You're more susceptible to getting sick. And so, when would be a good time for you to start taking care of that? And now is the best time for that. Fair enough? So, is that making sense, right? You guys following me here? So, now, I want to take this a few steps further, right? And so there is some researchers, Kubler-Ross, Adam Hayes, and Hobson, that developed another curve that kind of sits on top of this. And this is much more relevant to what's going on in our world today, right? So if we now divide this graph into basically quadrants, right? We can see that there are these four quadrants, right? And in terms of this curve that these researchers came up with, when things get chaotic, when things are volatile and things are uncertain, a lot of times individuals panic, i.e. they go and buy a bunch of toilet paper, right? Or they buy out all the water, they buy out all these different things, right? And then there's some people that go into denial. So this first quadrant up here is about denial. And look, is it really that bad, right? Is what happened, is this stressor that bad? Is it gonna take me out? Is this really that big of an issue, right? And from denial, what we end up doing then is going into anger, right? So we have anger on this downward trend, right? So now we're driving down into anger. But in that, there is resistance in this quadrant, we're fighting, not only physiologically and psychologically, unconsciously fighting what's going on, but we are actually consciously fighting what's going on. Like, we don't like it. We're kicking and screaming the whole way down, right? Like, F this, right? Again, at some point in time, there is some form of intervention, right? But before that, like, well, while we're intervening, we're sitting there going, well, why isn't it getting better? Why isn't it, instantaneously improving? And sometimes that leads to depression. And certainly a depressed state. So physiologically and psychologically, we have depressed states here, right? So our state is being depressed. And in that uncertainty and being at the bottom and not knowing that things are going to get better, there comes a point in time in our growth process where we let go, right? And the moment we let go, we create what's called acceptance. And it's in this period here where we now are in exploration. And that's this quadrant, exploration. And here things are getting better. We have hope. We have optimism now. Things are getting better. We're starting to feel a little better, right? There's renewed energy here. There's learning here. Things are changing here, right? And then that leads us to this new space where we have a feeling of satisfaction that, things are changing and that we're able to integrate and create new meaning on what's going on in our world. And that gives us a sense of commitment. And so I really liked this process that Kubler-Ross came up with. And they're different individuals. Kubler-Ross, Adam is another individual, Hayes, and then Hobson developed this curve and this quadrant pattern. And I like it overlaid with the stress adaptation cycle because it really is. Like when I take athletes through this process, when I take my executives through this process, there is denial. Like, it's like, I don't really want to do this. I don't want to get into this, or I'm not as bad as I think I am. And then they resist the entire way. Like, they fight me getting in it. And then there comes some point in time where they realize that they're not as good as they thought they were. And they let go of that. There's an egoic battle that goes on through this process. And that egoic battle is what's holding us back. And the moment that we can get to acceptance, the sooner we can let go, the sooner we can get to commitment, the sooner we can get to these learnings and the new life that we have in store for us, and really get to the growth, the capacity, this ability to be able to handle any load, right? And look, this is an iterative process. It's not a one-off sort of thing. This is, my clients do this every single day. We go through this process every single day. And it's prepared them to be able to handle tremendous amount of stress, and be able to go on to the field of competition where things are chaotic, things are volatile, things are uncertain, and be able to make good decisions. And I encourage you that if this is where you are and you haven't prepared, it's okay. Now's the time to start. Fair enough? If you like this, if this was valuable to you, like, subscribe, and share with somebody that would benefit from this information. I'll see you on the next video.